Hi everyone, good afternoon. Thanks for your interest in this topic, which is very close to my own heart. I've been in this space, the energy and sustainability space, for full time since 2008, working for a company called RedMonk. I head up the practice within RedMonk, which focuses on energy and sustainability, and we term that practice GreenMonk. The talk I'm giving today is on the intersection of the Internet of Things and energy. I have a quick video here. I'm not sure how the sound will work out, but we'll try it. No, we won't. We'll try it. Come on, you can do it.
The Earth. You may know it as that blue thing Bruce Willis is always trying to save. Or from its famous collaboration with wind and fire. Or just simply as that place where George Clooney lives. Anyway, the Earth had some genuinely bad news this week.
A White House report that says global warming threatens every part of the U.S.
This isn't something in the distant future. Climate change is already affecting us now.
Now. Smart move, Obama. That is a key shift in how to talk about climate change, because we've all proven that we cannot be trusted with the future tense. We've been repeatedly asked, don't you want to leave a better Earth for your grandchildren? And we've all collectively responded, fuck 'em. Incredibly, this latest damning scientific report may still face an uphill climb with some of us.
There's that Gallup poll that came out last month, which found 1 in 4 Americans is skeptical of all the effects of climate change and thinks this issue's been exaggerated.
Who gives a shit? That doesn't matter. You don't need people's opinions on a fact. You might as well have a poll asking which number is bigger, 15 or 5. Or do owls exist? Or are there hats? The debate on climate change should not be whether or not it exists. It's what we should do about it. There is a mountain of research on this topic. Global temperatures are rising, heat waves are becoming more common, sea surface temperatures are also rising, glaciers are melting, and of course no climate report is complete without the obligatory photo of a polar bear balancing on a piece of ice.
I love John Oliver. Okay, a couple of quick notes about myself. I blog on greenmonk.net. I'm on Twitter, Twitter/Tom Raftery. Email, phone number, and I put all my slides up on SlideShare. So this talk will be up there later today or tomorrow, so you can go there and download it if you're interested. Also, most of my slides, not this one, but most of my slides have a link at the bottom to reference the data on the slide. So those are clickable links in the PDF that'll be on SlideShare, so you can go and check them out yourself. The talk structure here, it's in 2 parts. First is the bad news, you've had some of it already, and then we flip it around and we give you the good news, what IoT will help us do to make things better. So, the bad news. This is the Keeling curve. It's the longest running scientific experiment to date. It's been run consistently day in, day out since 1958. It was started by Charles Keeling. It's running out of the Scripps Institute on Mauna Loa in Hawaii. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's monitoring CO2 in the atmosphere. It's above the cloud inversion layer, so it's taking in the ocean winds coming in to Hawaii, and you can see the chart is going the wrong direction. Any direction that's not flat for CO2 in the atmosphere is the wrong direction. It goes up and down seasonally every year. That's why it's kind of zigzagged as you go to the different seasons, but essentially it's going up. 2013 was the first year it went above 400 parts per million. It did so for a couple of days. This year, in March, it stayed above 400 for the month of March, and it was the first time it stayed above 400 for an entire month. And it's still above 400 today. It'll start to go down in the next couple of weeks, and it'll go below 400 again, but next year it'll go above 400 again earlier in the year, and it'll stay above it for longer. We're seeing, as a result of this, we're seeing warmest May on record. 2014 was the warmest year on record. 2015 is an El Nino year, so it'll be warmer again, more than likely. So 2015 will probably be, again, another record-setting year. As a result of which, we're having heat waves. This one is in Pakistan and has killed 800 people so far. And that's that's a headline from this morning from the BBC. So right up to the minute. This is flooding in New Zealand. Again, this is this week. California's drought, again, they're looking now at desalination, which is a massive energy footprint. Again, that's a headline from this week. And this is the result on the West Coast. To try and deal with that, at the UN Climate Conference in Copenhagen in 2009, 167 countries came to an accord to say we would try and limit global warming to 2 degrees centigrade. Now, 2 degrees centigrade is, if you convert that into CO2, it will take us 565 gigatons of CO2 to shift to 2 degrees centigrade more than the 1990 baseline. We've actually gone 1.2 degrees, no, we've gone 0.8 degrees already, so we have another 1.2 degrees to go. So to get to that 1.2 degrees more, we have to stick 565 gigatons of CO2 into the atmosphere. Now, to kind of try and make that a little more real for you, just try and consider what a ton of CO2 might look like. A gigaton is 1 billion tons. So we have to stick 565 billion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. So that gives you some idea. Right now, we're currently putting about 50 gigatons per year into the atmosphere. And then natural processes like plant growth and oceans absorb 25 of it back. So we've got a little over 20 years left in our CO2 budget before we hit 2 degrees C, if we continue on business as usual. The big problem, though, is this. The fossil fuel, a lot of the shale gas was discovered in the Marcellus Shale in the US and in England and a lot of other countries as well. So that 2,795 is a conservative figure. And when borrowings are based on, they will lose 80% of their value if they don't get that out of the ground. They'll have stranded assets worth, if they leave it in the ground, it's a net loss to them of 21 trillion US dollars. They're not too enthusiastic about that. This is why right now in Saudi Arabia, they're getting as much oil out of the ground as possible. The price is dropping and they keep pumping it. They're not stopping because they want that 565, they want as many of those gigatons to be Saudi gigatons as possible. And it's not just me saying this. This is a report from PricewaterhouseCoopers. They release this report every year. And again, the link is in the bottom there, and it's downloadable. This is their low carbon economy report that they release every year. And in this graph, the dotted line is where we are currently. So they're projecting forward to 2100, saying that right now, we are reducing our carbon output by about 1% a year. Whereas what we need to be doing is reducing it. Background on electricity, and I'm bringing up telecoms here. This is Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone, and this is him with his first telephone in 1876. Looks a bit different to what we have today. If you put one of these things in his hands, if he managed to figure out that it was a phone at all, he wouldn't know how, in God's name, to use it. On the other hand, this is Thomas Edison. He's credited with being the first person to architect an electricity grid. And if you put him in front of any of today's electricity grids, he'd have no problem whatsoever figuring it out because they haven't changed a jot in the last 100 years, but you know what's going to happen. What they're going to have to head to, though, is a system that's more like this. One where producers are all over the place, pushing energy into the grid. And that makes it a lot more difficult for them to control because you've got a system where you've gone from a controllable central generation to suddenly everyone gets up, opens a fridge, flushes the toilet, boom, the generation has to go way, way up. Other times would be times like Christmas week, and that goes up. I live now in the south of Spain, and the typical peaks for us would be times like August, middle of August, middle of the afternoon, 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon. It is roasting. So everyone has their shutters down, windows closed, and aircon cranked up. So these are the times at all. So it's massively wasteful. Electricity grids are dumb. And I have a little video to show you just to prove this point. This is...
It's impossible to know where the next storm's going to hit. When it does, it can wreak havoc on the power system.
There's a weather advisory in effect with high winds, heavy rains, and potential lightning.
I don't like thunder.
When outages occur, it's a race against time to get the power back. Many utilities rely on customers to know
your address, please.
So, when I said electricity grids are dumb, they're really dumb. That's absolutely typical. It's becoming a little less typical, but that's absolutely typical. The power goes out. They're analog networks. They know where the power is out. And then they send a truck roll. And the first truck roll is to go and try and find out why the power is out. So this is, I mentioned the supply, the demand. This is the Red Electrica de España. This is from their website in 1977. So that's 1977 on the left. It's hard to see, I know. 1977 on the left, right up to 2013. Every doubling of installed capacity, price drops 20%. And that leads to things like this. This graph is same kind of thing. In orange, you're seeing the price drop for 1,000 megawatts in the park, and the park is rated to take 1,000 megawatts. They said if they got the contract for 1,000 megawatts, then they would do it for 5.4. Who's going to create the Uber of energy? And what are they going to do with it? Go for it, guys. Seriously. Right now, the way we are, you can't, with the energy we have and the energy we're going to be creating, there aren't any really good options. You can't take energy and stick it in a box and put it on a shelf and wait for a rainy day. You can kind of, sort of. There are exotic storage with pumped hydro. You pump water up a hill and then let it come back down when you want the energy. To give you an example, there's a pumped hydro station in Ireland in a place called Turlock Hill. It was built between 1967 and 71, and it was at a cost of then 20 million Irish pounds. So that would be billions in today's money, 85 kilowatt battery, depending on which one you get. And this is fascinating, because these cars, these Tesla cars, and the batteries as well, are connected. So if you are Tesla, and I'm sure Elon Musk has already thought of this, you are connected to however many thousand cars they've sold. Let's say he sells 100,000 Teslas or 100,000 batteries, and he's able to connect to all of them. Basically, he's got a virtual power plant. He can control them, he can, with the permission of the owner, obviously, if the owner signs up for the service. The owner of the battery. So this is where we get to the IoT part eventually. Sorry it took so long. The Internet of Things is baked into the electricity grid at the high level, at the high voltage level. Companies like GE, that last slide, this one, Iberdrola, and lots of the large manufacturers manufacture their devices to have what they call machine-to-machine technologies built in. So for example, CGI, who are, they're now CGI, they were the former Logica, they have a CGI built it for Energia de Portugal because Energia de Portugal wanted to go back to the manufacturers of the turbines and beat them over the head meter, but from the smart meter forward to the substations and the transformers, and they're all talking. I was in the Schneider Electric system on a chip for less than $2. And because they can put a system on a chip for less than $2, he said, we're putting them in everything we manufacture. Every single item we manufacture now has a system and a chip on it, which means they're all connected and they're all communicating. So from now on out, any of the stuff that Schneider makes, and Schneider aren't alone in this, ABB and the others are all doing it as well. It's just I happen to be talking to them. So ABB are doing it. And then you get to the low voltage side. There's security cameras and the thermostats. And I saw a tweet the other day from a guy, I've forgotten who it was, I'm sorry, but he tweeted that for only $200, You can now control those again from wherever. And the reason I'm talking about all these things is now we have everything, or we're starting to get everything connected. We've got the low voltage side of things, we've got the medium voltage side of things, and we've got the high-end, high voltage things all connected. Not connected to each other, but they're all connected trends here, is we should start to have them talk to each other. And we should get them to adjust their behavior automatically. And this is starting to happen. What you may not be aware of is the price of electricity on the open market can change. This is a graph of 3 days pricing. The days are color-coded there. So 3 days pricing of electricity in Ireland. And you can see that there are peaks, and we're never exposed to this. We pay a flat rate typically. Some of the better utilities now are exposing us to a little bit of that by putting time of use pricing, but not all. It depends on the market. Some of the utilities are better at this than others. But if we start to expose our devices to this morning and turn on the oven to make your dinner because it's cheap, but your fridge or your freezer, typically charging of your car if you have an electric car. So you start to time shift the electricity. You start to, do you remember that 2.7 extra gigawatts of electricity we had in Ireland on that windy night when there was no demand? Suddenly, if all the cars and all the washing machines and all the fridge compressors start coming on at that time, you start to consume it. So, as you move the demand to match the supply, you make a greener grid. You make it, you make it more stable, and the more stable you make it, the easier you make it for utilities to add more renewables to the system. And just this year, an organization called EPRI, which is the Electrical Power Research Institute in America, came out with an open standard called OpenADR. And ADR is automated demand response. Demand response is where you are managing the demand. So this OpenADR protocol has been released. It was built in conjunction with EPRI, and the American Power Company, and the ESB in Ireland, and EDF, Energy de France, as well, was involved in the creation of this standard. And it has now been released. So because it's an open standard that has been agreed by all these power companies and released, more and more devices will be able to use this standard to listen to signals from the grid and adjust their behavior. And it will no longer be the kind of proprietary protocol that Whirlwind have been using. It'll be available to anyone to use in any device. This is what's called peak shaving. It's taking the top off the load. So, Eric Schmidt, talking about this, had a good quote. He said, "I can imagine a smart garage where I plug in my car and the computer handles it. I could even make money by cost shifting. It solves energy security, energy prices, and job creation, and by the way, climate change." So, there's an extra, I'm almost there, almost finished. There's an extra kind of bonus what if question one. And this is when I pose this one and utility companies hear it, it freaks them out. What if that smart meter in your house were the equivalent of net neutral? What if the smart meter belonged to you, not the utility company? And what if the smart meter could go out across the electricity providers and choose whichever provider had the cheapest, greenest electricity at any point in time, and it select the next 30 minutes electricity from them? Suddenly you get into a situation where there's a real need for the utilities to become cheaper and greener. But with the solar prices caving, that's going to happen anyway. Yes. Okay, in conclusion, I gave you the bad news. We're in deep doo-doo. But the good news is we're technologists, and we can fix it. We've got those standards there. We've got the devices. We've got everything connected. Let's make it so. Thank you. If you have any questions, I don't know if we have time for them now. If we don't, my contact details are there, and they're in the first slide as well, but I'm happy to take questions now, Gail, if we have time.
I think we have some time for 2 or 3 questions. Any question? Yeah.
Yes, thank you for a great speech.
Thank you.
I have a question. You're talking about solar expanding as much as it could and getting cheaper and cheaper. But a couple of years ago, there were a lot of talks about the materials in solar panels are quite, some of the metals are quite rare, and we are running out of them. How would that be?
No, it's a good point, but that's not happening anymore. Obviously, the price is continuing to come down. So they're now... they're making all kinds of advances in solar all the time. I read a report a couple of weeks ago about they've now created a type of solar panel which doesn't require silicon anymore. They can do it with carbon. So the advances in solar technologies are happening all the time, and they're impossible to keep up with. And that's what's helping that Swanson effect keep going. So no, there's no issue around rare metals or anything like that in solar. That's not a problem anymore.
Just for the speakers of this afternoon, can you stand up and go in line on this side while I take the next question?
A question here regarding privacy.
Yeah.
Do you ever see privacy concerns hindering the development of the Internet of Things, or do you see convenience and corporate interests trumping everything and relegating privacy as a struggling second only meant for activists?
I think you've pretty much answered your own question there. I think I think convenience and corporate interests will trump any privacy problem or issues that some people might have. And you see it every day. I mean, there have been studies done where, people go into a car park of a business and say, here's $5, will you give me your password for your network? And they do. It's ridiculous. People don't value privacy as much as they probably should. So no, I think, absolutely, the Internet of Things won't be hindered to any large extent by privacy issues.
Maybe last question? Yeah, Ignacio.
We seem to rely a lot on new technologies with probably common to our countries, but probably pollution and energy problem is also quite coming from development countries and so on. Do you see a chance to make all this that accessible, that we really can fight the problem worldwide?
Really can fight what problem? Sorry.
The energy problem in itself. So over smart grids, I'm concerned about perhaps we can do that in the US and Europe and so on, but what about those development countries? Do they have the chance to get these technologies?
I think they do. I think they'll be different. So developing countries, if I think of somewhere like some of the countries in Africa, for example, they're not having to build out. They're going to leapfrog, kind of the way they're leapfrogging with mobile and not having landlines. They're going to do something similar with electricity grids. They're far more likely to have lots of small grids than one large grid. So they'll have community grids. They'll have, some solar panels, maybe a field of solar panels at the back of the town, and that'll feed in, and that'll do just that town. That kind of idea. So because that'll be cheaper to do, they won't have the same massive infrastructure costs that they would have if they tried to build out a grid for the entire country.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom.
Thanks, Kyle. Thank you.